The idea of a cycle is that we go through a difference each time. We ebb and we flow. It's a tool for balance and giving tons of permission and evoking trust. And I was diagnosed with PCOS and told that I'd never have a baby. It was like somebody had given me language for something that I was experiencing in my body, but I had no language to explain it. We transition through 4 phases of our menstrual cycle. On day 24 of her cycle, she can't reverse park her car. So through tracking, she realised it happened every single month.
Welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to episode number 206 of Starting the Conversation. I'm your host, Alice Benham, and this week I'm joined by the fabulous Lou Perham, who is a cyclical living mentor, to chat all about how we can be a little bit more cyclical in the way that we run our businesses. Hey, Lou.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm genuinely so excited to have you here today. On the way to the studio, I was listing out what we were going to talk about in today's episode. It just came so naturally. I was like, I would like you to be here for a few hours. I just need to grill you on all of your wisdom.
We can do that. That's fine. It
Perfect.
might be a few episodes, but we can definitely sit here and chat.
Part
for as
2
long as you
already
need.
coming soon.
Yeah, love it.
Place to begin.
Yeah.
What is a cyclical living mentor?
It's a really good question. So let's start with cyclical, because I think that's somebody actually asked it to me this week on the walk home from the school run. And she was like, what does cyclical actually mean? And I was like, yeah, we probably need to go into that. So the idea is that we externally look like we're all the same all the time.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the expectation we have of ourselves. And by almost claiming that it's a cyclical living environment that we want to set up for ourselves, what I'm saying is that we change. The idea of a cycle is that we go through a difference each time, yeah? So we ebb and we flow, our inhale and our exhale. It's constantly moving and it's constantly changing.
Yeah.
And when we embrace that, there is so much more ease and joy and reduction in stress that's available to us. So the way that I like to imagine what I do is I walk side by side with people to establish what their way of cyclical living is. Everybody's unique, and what that looks like for them in their lives will be unique. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the work that I do is really mentoring on how that can really come to fruition and come to real life in your life.
So interesting. And I'm so with you on looking at life in that cyclical way, and especially looking at business in that cyclical way, I think is so interesting. I remember it was a couple of years ago, I was working with my life coach at the time, and I think I was struggling with business and I was just feeling a bit frustrated, and I was like, I'm doing all the things and nothing seems to be happening, and why a few months ago was everything happening and now it's not. And it was then that she said, well, don't you think maybe your business works in cycles in the same way that the seasons do? Think about the winter season of your business where, you're sowing seeds, all feels a bit doom and gloom. There's a lot of patience. You're just preparing the ground, and that's what then leads to the summer season where you've got a lot of the external stuff. It feels shiny. Everything feels like you're, quote unquote, succeeding. And even that very kind of narrow, singular look at how we can look at life and business in a cyclical way was such a game changer for me, because it immediately just gave me this permission to kind of let things grow and exist in the way that I guess is how they're naturally meant to.
Yeah, and so much permission as well for it to be different, and to also know that tangibly this thing right now is where it's at, but in a week's time, a year's time, 10 years' time, it will look different. So there's a trust in the process that also gets inbuilt in starting to work cyclically and understand your cycles, because it's going to change. Whether that's a preference and you're trying to hold on to it because you're like, no, this thing's really good and I really like how this feels.
Yeah.
Or it's something that you don't like and you're like resisting it. I suppose the way that I weave sort of the spiritual side of this in is that it's a presencing tool. It's a presencing tool to be like, this is where I am today. This is how it is today for me. And then from there, also trusting that will change and shift and know. So that's the non-attachment element of bringing in my yogi wisdom here already. That non-attachment sense to it as well, which also serves us in our business, because, if we get too attached to outcomes, to goals, absolutely we want to be driving towards something and working towards something. Otherwise we're a bit like Bambi on ice, right? But if we get overly attached to it, that's when the inner critic can come in and be uber brutal to us. So for me, it's a tool for balance and giving tons of permission and evoking trust.
And where did the interest in living in a cyclical way come from for you? I'm so interested in kind of that origin story to what you do now.
So I was 25 and I was really suffering with period pain, and I was diagnosed with PCOS and told that I'd never have a baby. And I was just like, that was just the most inconceivable idea to me. But I've been maternal since I was 1. I got my doll Bonnie, and ever since then I've been a mum. Like, it's just been in me. I don't know why, it's how I came through. So the idea that this man told me in a white coat that I wasn't going to be able to have a child, I was like, I'm not okay with this. And I kind of wasn't told any options. It was just like, this is something you'll just have to live with. And I was also still experiencing extreme pain every month, and it was crippling. I was in bed and I couldn't move, and I was having really intense bouts of anxiety and low moods and stuff like that in the run up to my period. So I went kind of, I suppose, on an exploration about what I could do about it. So I started with nutrition. I had all my hormones tested. I did all of that kind of more, I suppose, physical aspect. And then at 30, I realised that my environment wasn't right for me, and I changed my job. So I was selling IT in London, and it was very high pressured, lots of big targets and stuff like that. And it was a great company to work for, but it just, the environment wasn't right for me. So I literally rang my mum one day and was like, can I move home? I was 30 years old, and I was so humbled by the whole experience. But then I got home and I found my yoga teacher, and I started doing my yoga teacher training. If I'm really truly honest, I started teacher training so that I could say I was doing something.
Yes.
I'd kind of, this perception of me externally was, oh, she's got this big high flying job and she earns all this money and she's really successful. And then I just pulled the plug on everything, and almost my nervous system needed a minute to catch up with it. And so it was almost, I started it as a Band-Aid, not realising.
You got to be able to say something at the Christmas party when people are like, Lou, what are you doing now?
Well, and I was going to Canada. My mum's Canadian. We were travelling to Canada, and I just needed to be able to tell my family something. It's like, it's fine, guys, I'm doing my yoga teacher training. But that took me on a whole journey. So my first, the base level was 2 years of training with my teacher, and then I went straight into my advanced, which was another 2 years. So I did 4 years of training, which was just incredible because it was so embodied. And I balanced out my hormones naturally through sun salutations. I dropped 2 dress sizes. I was moving and respecting my body. I was the healthiest I've ever been mentally, physically, emotionally. But I also met my yoga teacher's wife who'd done the Red School training, and she ran a workshop, and I went to it, and it was like somebody had given me language for something that I was experiencing in my body, but I had no language to explain it. And the lights just went on. And I had such a quick process in the room where I was like, I literally sat there and I was like, my womb hates me. And by the end of it, I was like, I'm really sad for men that they don't get this experience, or people without periods, that they don't get this experience. Within the space of 3 hours, that was my transformation, I suppose. And I was like, I need to go and study this. So I went and studied with Red School.
Is it called Red School because it's about the menstrual cycle and period blood is red?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah. They're
great branding.
Yeah, they are. They're amazing. And they've just got a book out recently on the menopause as well. So if anybody's interested in that, they've got Wild Power, which is their menstrual cycle book, and then they've got Wise Power, which is their menopause book, and I'd really highly recommend anything that they do. They're awesome. And I just fell down the rabbit hole with the cycles, and then I fell pregnant. I wasn't supposed to be able to have a baby, and I now have a 4-year-old.
Oh, so how amazing.
I just want, and I don't suffer with the period pain that I used to. I've been able to integrate so much of, it's like the linear lens has gone and the cyclical lens is now in my life. It's how I see everything. And it's how I exist. Like my 4-year-old turned around to me the other day when I had my period. I was like, Mummy's bleeds arrived. And he's like, congratulations, Mum. I was like, yes, to the next generation.
That's so sweet. Imagine if it was a celebration like that. I'd be here for it.
Yeah, and so am I. And I think that's a bit of, when we need rest, take rest. When it's time for us to plan and innovate, then do that. When it's time for us to get out there and create and get visible and take care of other people and be generous, do that. And then it's time to focus and knuckle down and really complete things, then do that. And that ultimately is what we go through in every process to create anything, whether that's in our business, whether that's booking a holiday or going away, whatever it is in our lives, doing the food shopping, anything, you go through this cyclical process of bringing something to fruition and completing it and then letting it go. And it's this beautiful, graceful respectful thing that we can embrace as opposed to resisting.
First of all, how incredible to have your son as kind of a tangible example of your personal growth and how much things have changed for you. I just think that's amazing. And second of all, you talked there about kind of putting on the cyclical lens and I guess looking, like you said, all areas of life and looking for, embracing and planning around the cyclical nature of things. What difference does that cyclical lens make? I guess perhaps in the context of business, for us business owners, when we think about the way we operate, the way we plan, the way that we look at our businesses, our mindset, why is it important that we look at it in that cyclical way?
It's about expectations. Let's start there, right? My expectation, if I imagine the linear world, it's like a graph that I saw in a maths lesson when I was younger, right? There's an axis and there's a line going from 0 to 100 and it's a straight line. And that to me is what the expectation that we have externally and internally of ourselves, right? I'm supposed to go from 0 and I'm supposed to keep growing. Whereas cyclical allows you, it's like a spiral. The graph is a spiral.
Yeah.
So you're continuing to evolve, but you're not expected to stay the same. And there is so much grace and there's so much permission that then allows for you to be multiple different versions of yourself. Because I am not the same every day. When I am bleeding, I wouldn't want to come and do this, for instance. It wouldn't be the best thing. I wouldn't be as articulate. My inner world is where I'm supposed to be at that time. My body wants to rest and being outward. I organise this on purpose. I'm day 18 today. I'm late summer of my cycle right now, like post-ovulation, but premenstrual, if that makes sense. So I'm at this beautiful time of my cycle where I can be more external and I can feel really comfortable in my own skin and my own body and I can be really present with you. And that's my experience. But I would feel very differently maybe if I was just coming out of my bleed. And it doesn't mean I can't do it then, but if I have an option, if I have a choice, if I can, and as people who have our own businesses, we have the grace of being able to make that decision for ourselves.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we, right? That's how we optimize. That's integrated self-care in your business. I'm going to do these things at this time because it feels best. Instead of forcing yourself to write content all month long, being able to, I know we talk about batch creating and planning and strategy, and I know that's a big thing for you.
Yeah.
But it's like also optimize it with your cycle. So when you're feeling most creative, like some people say, oh, I feel really creative in my summer. I actually don't. Sitting down and writing for me in my summer is like, and that's around the ovulation time, is like, I want to be out. I want to be with people. Sitting down at my laptop is difficult almost. I'm too distracted because I'm in like the dizzying summer heights, right? I want to get social.
Yeah.
So actually getting the ideas in my bleed and then writing in my inner spring, so pre-ovulation, is my perfect time. But I've only discovered that through tracking and working with myself. Now, other people might be different. And that's why I talked at the beginning about everybody being unique and having to like figure out what your way is.
And I know what we're focusing on in today's episode and this conversation is, you know, your menstrual cycle and how that element of life being cyclical is important to listen to. But I'm assuming in the context of, you know, how we run our businesses, listening to all the other cycles as well.
For sure.
You know, looking for the cyclical nature in the way that our businesses operate, in the way that the industries we're in work, in the way that we like working. I guess even looking for the cycles in the year or in the day and noticing, is that true? Like, you know, it's not just the cyclical nature of us when we have menstrual cycles, but it's all the other bits too.
Well, and a really good example for me at the moment is I am bleeding with the full moon and I'm ovulating on the dark moon. So there's two opposing cycles that are happening. But I've figured out how I can harness that and work with it. So yes, there are absolutely other cycles happening. So, you know, you have more energy naturally at the beginning of the day. Then you have like that sort of, I don't know if anybody else has this, but in the afternoon, I'm like, right, I've got to get it done. Like, you know.
Oh, I'm the opposite. My friends and I call it the slug hours between 2 and 5, where we're just like, I cannot do a thing. I'm going to be on TikTok for the next 3 days.
And that's really true too. But that's also like that you can get that slump. But I think what helps me is if I've got something really tangible to do, I can go into really deep work at that time. I might not want to. I might feel a bit pissed off and grumpy about it, but I can do, if I put on the right music and if I set myself up and I know exactly what I'm doing, I can't not know what I'm doing. Otherwise I get into that exact thing where I'm just like, I'm going to do lots of different things. But if I have a specific thing that I've booked in and planned in and I know exactly what needs to be completed, that is when I am the most effective, which is actually mirrored in your menstrual cycle as well. So a lot of this can ring true when you start looking at it. You're like, oh, that's the same energy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like that time of day and that time in my menstrual cycle and that time of year all feels like that to me. Whoa. And you start having these like aha things where you're like, well, now I know that about myself.
Yeah.
I didn't know that about myself before. Now I can work with it. As opposed to working against it.
That's what interests me. Like, I am a total newbie when it comes to this topic. I've got no understanding of my menstrual cycle other than I bleed for about 5 days, usually at the start of the month. That's where my knowledge ends. But when I hear people talking about it, I had a client I worked with about a year ago, and it was so fascinating to hear how the way she planned out her launches, and even when we did our calls and when we were doing big strategy versus being a bit more gentle with things, for her always came back to, well, how can I optimize this based on when my cycle is? And for me, as someone who's very focused on like efficiency and optimization and how can I get the most out of time, I was like, oh, well, that sounds quite interesting to me. Because it doesn't feel, you know, airy-fairy and like a fluffy extra. It's like, oh, that feels like kind of fine-tuning the operational side
100%.
of me as a human. That sounds really interesting to me. So as someone who's got basically no knowledge, let's just say, of the menstrual cycle, can you give us a little back to school summary? I know, you know, disclaimer, obviously, everyone's cycles are different. Birth control is going to affect people. Conditions like PCOS are going to affect people. Yeah. If we are somewhat generalizing and maybe looking at a typical cycle, you know, a lot of those phrases you said earlier, I've got no clue what any of those mean. Yeah. What is it?
Okay, cool.
Tell me all.
Okay, so let's go back to basics. So we have 4 inner seasons, which comes from Red School. Okay, so they developed this idea that we transition through 4 phases of our menstrual cycle. So your inner winter is when you're menstruating. Your inner spring is pre-ovulation. Your inner summer is around ovulation, and then your inner autumn is premenstrual. Okay, so we transition continually through the 2 poles. So you have a pole at the south at menstruation where you are, and you can imagine this with your inhale and exhale, is quite a nice way of actually embodying it. So if you take an inhale, you can feel your body rise up, get fuller, take up more space in the world. And then as you exhale, the breath comes in, it internalizes, your body softens, you kind of let go, and there's this surrender that happens, right? And that's exactly the same that happens from the point of menstruation. You inhale, your energy rises up to the top to ovulation, and then from ovulation, you're then coming back down. So there's this shift in energy that happens to be outward and then to be inward. So again, we're generalizing here. But as we transition through those 4 seasons, there are different qualities that sit in each of those 4 stages. So the inner winter might feel a little bit more like we would imagine, you know, that nature does, right? So hibernation. I love the analogy of a tree. So if you imagine an oak tree, and obviously I'm talking about 4 seasons here, so let's talk about the Northern Hemisphere for now. So you've got a tree, and what does it look like in winter?
It's pretty dead.
Looks dead.
Not looking great.
But what's it actually doing underneath, inside? Its roots are going deeper. It's sucking up nourishment from the ground, and it's restoring and reviving itself so it can go into its next evolution, right? Its next spiral. It's evolving itself from the inside. Nobody's expecting it to be anything else. And yet we expect ourselves as human beings to be a different way than what we are naturally.
So true.
So we're breaking ourselves. And this is when things like burnout, mental health issues, like that's what I see anyway when I've worked with people, is it's like as soon as you give yourself permission to rest and really set those boundaries around that time and bring that in, it is when it can be such a game changer for people. Again, expectation management there as well, right? So you're looking at your diary, if we're talking about this from a business perspective, lightening the load that week. So you're protecting yourself and your nervous system and your needs, and you're factoring in that self-care that you need, which is rest at that time.
So what I'm hearing is, so I'm on my period right now. Everyone's welcome for that information. Maybe not the best week for me to do a launch, go to the gym 3 days in a row, do a day of podcast recording today, and then a big drive to a supplier tomorrow. Is that what I'm hearing? We've maybe not optimized this week.
How do you feel? Let's put it there. Like, do you feel in your energy that this has been draining for you? How's it felt for you?
I just wonder if I'm so out of touch with how things feel. Like, I feel pretty good. So I'm pretty good with like my habits. Like, I eat well, I move a fair bit, look after myself as much as I can. And I think that probably keeps me like good enough at kind of probably any point across my cycle. But I feel like I don't really ask myself any questions past that point, almost because I don't feel like I've got space to. It's like, well, if I don't feel well, I still need to do the thing. So let's do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe if I actually thought about it, I'd be like, maybe interesting timing there.
And interestingly, when you start tracking in a sense of like day by day, like menstrual cycle awareness is that daily tracking, right? And it's the way that we integrate our internal world with the external world. That's how I check in every day and I'm like, okay, so how was today? How do I feel physically? How do I feel intellectually or mentally? What's my emotions and my energy like? And where am I at spiritually or intuitively? So it's, if you like the analogy, it's pies.
Love pies. So I'm here for that.
Love a pie. Every day, just write down 4 words physically. So one for each aspect.
Yeah.
And you just tune in. And that as a practice becomes a gauge for where you're at. Now, after a series of months, I like to do 3 as a minimum. You then can look back and you can look at your cycle and you can go, there's a pattern here. So for me, I noticed that there was a pattern occurring around day 11 of my cycle. I had no awareness of it before. And I realized it was because, and I'll come on to this in a second when we talk more about the other inner seasons, that I wasn't doing something pivotal at that point. And as soon as I realized that there was kind of like this wobbly day at that point, I was like, I can do something about this. And then that had an impact on the next season. And then that had an impact on my inner critic in the premenstrual. And then it was just like this, like a domino effect.
Yeah.
And it's a healing, it's an on-the-job inner healing tool. Like I always say, like with the menstrual cycle, when you start practicing it as an actual practice, with anything else like you've just said there, like you have to go to the gym, you have to sit on your yoga mat. Your menstrual cycle is inside you. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to do anything.
It doesn't cost you anything.
It doesn't cost you anything. All you have to do is slow down and feel. Slow down and bring your awareness and attention inside, not external. It's not about thinking, it's about feeling. So that's why when we talk about like it being like a feminine practice, because if you think, and I'm not talking about male, female here, I'm talking about masculine and feminine energy, right? The menstrual cycle is the feminine energy, right? It is the natural, like the linear is the masculine and the feminine is the spiral, the cyclical, right? So when we sit with that and we're like, okay, how do I sit in this practice of my feminine energy when I still need to do stuff in the world? But that's the reason I love this so much, because the spring and the summer are kind of more of your masculine energy, and then your autumn and your winter are more of your feminine energy.
So it's less about I do less work here and more work there, but more almost the theming of that work changes.
Yes.
Depending on your strengths.
And this goes to productivity too, right? We were talking about cyclical productivity, and it's like, how many of us have amazing ideas when we're in the shower or on a bike ride or on a dog walk? Because we've stopped. We don't give ourselves permission to stop, to be creative. We don't give ourselves permission to rest so that we can be that tree, to put our roots into the ground, to nourish, because we're so busy being external in that masculine energy, which is our external world as well. So we almost have to, I don't want to use the word fight, but we have to advocate for our own feminine energy that's necessary. And when I say that, that's about the truth-telling, the boundaries, the resting, the surrendering, the letting go. And it's probably the stuff that some people might not be quite so comfortable with, right? The stuff that's a bit more challenging because it's not as shiny, it's not as celebrated, it's not as visible, right? Like me laying here on the sofa right now, like if that's what I needed to do, I want someone to be like, yes, I celebrate you laying down and doing what you need for yourself.
Yeah.
Versus being here and being super articulate. Like they're both a quality of being productive, but it's what do I need in the moment.
So what does the other side of your cycle then look like? If that kind of first half is maybe more typically, again, I know you said earlier, kind of the golden rule is just what's true for you.
Yeah.
But I guess typically if that first bit's about, I guess this is me testing that I've learned my knowledge, you know, maybe a little bit more inner work, a little bit more rest, lower expectations of yourself in terms of the external shiny big stuff.
Yeah.
What does then the flip side of that look like as we move through our cycle?
So we've started off in the inner winter, and that is sort of the feminine energy, but we'll start right at the end of the inner winter. Imagine that, right? So we're crossing over into our inner spring. Mm-hmm. And that's going to take us into this rising energy like I was talking about. So there's this sense of new beginnings, and you can feel it in the world, right? You can see the buds on the trees. Imagine going back to this oak tree analogy,
yes.
right? There's this beautiful kind of potential. The air smells different. There's excitement. There's like anything could happen. And it's a time for us to be innovative, experimental, playful, starting to almost come out of our shell. And we are opening, right? Back to that oak tree, as you come through your inner spring, it kind of, you see the baby leaves on it, right? You see the buds and then you start to see the baby leaves.
Yeah.
And then you transition from your inner spring into your inner summer. And again, reminding people that you've got your pre-ovulation and then your ovulation.
Mm-hmm.
That ovulation period is that full expression, that yes to life. That tree is there to serve. It's there to house animals. People climb it. It offers shade to people. Like, it's in service. But it's not questioning itself. There's no self-doubt. There's no like, should I be doing this or should I be doing that? It's just doing what a tree is supposed to be doing. And I love that, because I'm just like, oh, I'm just supposed to be doing what I'm doing. But I have to, when I internalize that, I have to know what that is first. So it's really important for me to, in my inner spring, have played with these ideas to know what I need to be doing, so that at that point, when I go into from my inner spring to my inner summer, I know what I'm supposed to be up to.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's like Bambi on ice.
Got all of the energy, but nowhere to place it.
Exactly. Yeah, we become messy and ungrounded, and it's no wonder. And then as we come through to, from our inner summer, we go into our inner autumn. And most people know this because it's the premenstrual phase, right? You kind of get that shift of like, I'm spinning all the plates and I'm doing all the things and this is great.
Yeah.
And I can take on the world. And then you're like, shit, I can't. And it's that reckoning that happens,
yes.
right? It's that like, it's the truth teller that comes out. It's the boundaries that come out really strongly. It's that pair of socks that have landed beside the laundry basket for 3 days straight that wasn't bothering you. Now you're calling bullshit on, right?
I am horrendous to be around in those few days before my period starts. And it's so funny. Every month I'm like, what's wrong with me? I'm like, is something up? Do I need to go to the doctors? Like, is something going? And then I come on my period and I'm like, yep, that was it. Yeah. I don't hate everyone. I don't want to break up with my boyfriend.
Yeah.
It's just premenstrual.
And it's so true, isn't it? And the thing is without cycle awareness, like as in like having that practice, we forget.
Yes.
So the other thing that cycle awareness does is anchor you in your reality of where you are. So when you're like, oh, I'm premenstrual, again, permission to be as you are, how you are. And I'm not saying that you should walk around just lashing people with your tongue because you're premenstrual.
You can have a bit more grace for yourself.
Compassion.
Perhaps. Yeah.
Self-compassion. That's what a lot of my clients say. They're like, oh, when I realised this. One of my favourite stories with my clients was that she, on day 24 of her cycle, she can't reverse park her car. So through tracking, she realised it happened every single month over 4 months of working together. And she was like, I just can't reverse park my car. And she goes, and I used to frustrate the fuck out of me. And now I just carry on down the road and I don't worry about it. And I'm like, yes, that's it. That's cycle awareness in action. That is living cyclically.
Yeah.
Right? It's in the day-to-day kind of nominal tasks that we kind of would then beat ourselves up about or mentally have like an extra load of stress because something that usually feels so easy then feels hard. It's like, or I could just make my life easier and drive on down the road to a parking space that's easier to get into.
And I guess we can bring that into the context of business where like you said, if you spend a few months tracking and you get to know like, oh, I'm really good at creating content in this part of my cycle, or launches seem to feel really good to me when it's in this part, it's then making all of your planning go through that filter of, and how does this timing work around, or not actually work around, but work with the cycle that's already happening.
And I think that's such an important mindset shift that you've just pointed out there, right? This isn't something that is done unto us. We can embrace this. These are our superpowers. This is how we bring more of us to the world. This is how I serve better. Me resting when I'm bleeding means I have more energy for the rest of the 21, 22 days of my cycle. Right?
So true. I guess it's that reframe of like, it's not happening to you, it's happening for you.
Yes.
To see it as something.
Or with you.
To work with. Yeah. Because I definitely see it as a happening to me. I'm a victim of it.
Yeah.
I will moan about it.
We have to endure it, right?
Yes.
I have to endure it. And I'm hormonal and like all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm hormonal, yes. Like my inner bitch is coming out because, you know what, you're crossing my boundaries. Or maybe I need to call myself into action because I haven't set a clear enough boundary here, or I did something 2 weeks ago and planned it for this time and I should have known better because it's not optimal for me. And this isn't about saying that you can do anything at any time of your cycle, right?
Yeah.
But how you come to it as well. And this is where self-care for me is so fundamental to this practice. And I say self-care and what I really mean is self-respect. It's going... So I had a meeting with a board director in a big retailer about menstruality in the workplace. I used to work there. And I sat down and I sent this email out to him and he came back straight away and said yes. I was so excited. And I planned it and I said, you know, could you do this date? Came back, it was in my like summer phase of my cycle. And I was like, this is brilliant. I'm going to be like all alive and jazzy and it's going to be fantastic. Obviously they get busy. So he then had to move it to 2 weeks later. I was day 2. And I was like, this is not ideal, but I'm going to use it to work with it and see what it is that I need. Because it felt like a really vulnerable conversation. I was going to somebody without a cycle, without a menstrual cycle, and talking to him about how important this was to me and that it would be really great if we could consider a policy. And I was having this vulnerable thing and it felt, you know, he was quite senior and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. How do I work with this? So I just turned up the volume on my self-care. And what I realized was that was all about self-respect. So my practice was a non-negotiable in the morning. I made sure I ate a really nourishing breakfast. I ran it through with people that I trusted, what I wanted to say. I leant into my notes and I came out of it and I was so peaceful and so clear and so clean. And then that evening I had no social engagements. I had nothing expected of me. I think my partner at the time actually cooked dinner. There were just things like that I put in place where I was like, my energy is a certain amount. I have a certain capacity and it's going into this thing. So I'm going to do everything I can to support myself to be able to do that thing.
Yes.
Now that might be a different aspect in your business. It might be going on alive, it might be, you know, connecting with people, it might be doing coaching calls, it might be doing like whatever that might look like. But then around it, we have the flexibility. Like I'm a mother, I have to feed my son. I have to like...
You can't be like, sorry, son, I'm on phase 3. It's not really in my vibe right now to be feeding you.
Like you have to be able to meet life, right?
Yes.
Like, that's not what I'm saying here. This isn't like I'm removing myself from the reality of life, but it's about how can I work with it and be appreciative of it.
Yes.
So like my son knows I change how I play with him. I'm very physical. I'm down on the floor. We're doing flying angels. We're silly. We're very playful. But when I'm bleeding, I don't expect that of myself, and he doesn't expect that of me. He will sit on the sofa and we'll have popcorn treasure bowls and we have snuggles and we watch a movie. And I give myself a permission to be a different kind of parent.
Yes.
Because my needs are different. I'm still meeting his. I'm still with him. But like in my business, it's the same. I see that. I'm still with my business. I'm still nourishing it. I'm just nourishing it in a different way.
And I'm really glad you've touched on there what feels to me like the permission slip to do it imperfectly. I think there's the expectation on, you know, I'm a big like do it or don't person. All or nothing is a mindset I slip into really easily.
Yeah.
So when I look at a concept like this, I think, well, it doesn't feel realistic to me to go to the extreme of, you know, sorry, clients, I can't have a call this week. I'm bleeding. not a good time. You're not going to get the bun. That I know for some people that level of adhering to it actually really works for them. The nature of my work and how full on both businesses are, I just can't control my schedule to that extent. But I like what you're saying there of almost trying to find the messy middle where it's you're listening to it. And yeah, if you still need to do something in a time that isn't optimal, okay, how do you help yourself with that? It's not, oh, I can't do it. Because I think that's what I had in my head, is that I was suddenly going to have to be like, sorry, calendar, we're going to have to block out weeks 1 and 2 because we don't do anything then. Which again, no hate if that does work for some people, but I know for me that right now doesn't feel possible.
Yeah, and I think that's it, right? Like everybody has to internalize it. Like in my contracts, I do not work on day 1 and 2 of my cycle. I have it written into my contracts because that is how important that rest is for me at that time. Because I will be a better mentor if I can receive that nourishment that I need at that time, and I know that. And I also will still mother, and so I have had to bend and flex certain things. I will still show up to my community call. I will still do that kind of work on, but I have inbuilt cyclical kind of environments into that where I can switch off my screen and lay on my bed if I want to during that time.
Yeah.
Or I can work from my boffice, like it's like...
Oh my God, boffice, I love
bed
it.
office.
I call it my soft office.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Are we in the hard office or the soft office today?
Yeah.
All this, follow a couple of people who, and they're usually American, who are very like, the worst thing you can do for your business is work from the sofa. Like, never work from the sofa, never work from your bed. And I'm just like, have you ever felt joy? Ever just had that moment when you're like, I don't want to sit at my desk today. I'm going to sit on the sofa.
Oh, especially when you're like, when you've got, say, menstrual cramps and you have a heat pad and you can get into bed and you can put cozy socks on and you can have a cup of tea beside you and you quilt up to your neck and you can have like a little, those like little IKEA laptop things. I've got one of those and I just pop it on my legs and I'm just there typing away and I'm like, I'm actually still working and I'm like having a spa day at the same time.
Perfect. So here for that.
Like I've got my nice like playlist on and I'm just you make your environment suit your state, not the other way around, I think.
I guess it's the same theory, but really weird analogy to use when it's like, buy clothes that fit your body, don't change your body to fit clothes.
I think that's
just like so weird how we look at life in that way of like, I have to fit myself into this very specific mold that's actually not optimal or comfortable for me.
Yeah.
Instead of actually just thinking about how it can work for me. And like you said at the very start of this episode, we run businesses. We have infinite control.
Yeah.
Like it baffles me, and I'm saying this with my own hand up, how often we become slaves to our businesses or we are victims to our schedules when the only person that's built that schedule and created that business is you.
Yeah.
Like granted, there's a few elements that you can't always control, but we are in such privileged positions where we can easily build what we do around what we need.
Yeah.
So almost why not?
Exactly.
Feels like the question.
And that's why I love this work, because when people start to do it, they innately know that this is what they're supposed to be doing all along. Like they're like, why haven't I been doing this sooner? Why haven't I known this information? Actually, quite a lot of anger comes up of like, why weren't we taught this in schools? How do we not know this information?
Yeah.
Like, why am I expected to be the same every day when obviously I'm not? Because also it's a disservice to those who don't have a menstrual cycle, because let's face it, everybody is impacted by cycles. We all have a sleep cycle. We all have a day cycle.
So true.
We're all impacted by the moon. It's extraordinary to me that we don't give ourselves more permission.
And it makes everyone's experience better, right? Mm-hmm. Like when you are performing at your best, everyone that your business and you as a person come into contact with gets a better experience as a result. It's not a selfish action.
Yeah.
But I do find it fascinating that particularly with the menstrual cycle, there's such weirdness around that. It's a weird example to use, but I put a TikTok up a couple of weeks ago that was about how, and it wasn't even that serious of a TikTok, I kind of made it more dramatic than it seemed, but I basically was saying how to beat the cost of living crisis, if you're in a relationship with a man, you should get him to pay for half of your period products, because men should pay for half, because most men do not have periods. That went viral, went in loads of like Daily Star, Daily Mail kind of articles.
Really?
And, yeah, it was a little bit crazy. And loads of the pushback was, shockingly, men just being like, why is it relevant to us? Or why does it have to be our problem? Like, you should keep that to yourself.
My whole womb is just clenched.
Right? It's ask someone who doesn't even really understand their cycle and really, I do now, but didn't understand at the time why it was relevant for anyone else to think about it or understand it. You obviously do not understand how much it affects women and inadvertently is affecting you. You just can't see it.
And the issue is that we don't know it, right? So how
true.
can we educate or talk to people or say about, I was 34 when I learned this, 32 when I learned this information. And so, of course, my peers don't necessarily understand it or don't think that they're responsible or don't see the outcome or the impact of it. It's just something that we've endured and we've brushed under the rug, and it's a dirty thing, or it's a inconvenience, or it's a emotional thing. I just don't subscribe to that. I think we have such an opportunity to change the narrative and empower ourselves. I'm still grappling with the label for this, but it's the antithesis of the type of leadership that I admire in the world, and I'm not yet clear on what I'm calling that, because it's not feminine leadership, because that negates the masculine. Like I said, with the two energies of the cycle, it's it's masculine and feminine energy, but it's like we've been living in this over masculinized, doing shiny, glittery, visible world, and we're shifting. You can feel it. There's the shift to kind of call out, telling the truth, right? Inner autumn is coming through, and everybody's calling bullshit on so much stuff at the moment. And it's like, what is that leadership where you're leading by example and embodying it and being in the grey, right? What you're talking about is like, it's either black or it's white. It's the yes or it's no. And what we're talking about is the maybe, the possibility, the unknown, right? That grey sweet spot in the middle where it's an and also. It's this and it's that. Coexist. Absolutely. And I think more and more we're seeing that. And I'm not sure what that leadership is called, is it? Because it's not feminine leadership, it's not. But I think that's what we're modelling. Us as business owners, we get this opportunity to be able to model the and both. Yes. I can be a powerhouse CEO of my business and own this, and I can also be the one that curls up in bed and takes 2 days off because my body is telling me that's the true thing for me. Some people don't need that. That's cool. That's great. Some people are like, I have so much energy when I'm bleeding, or I play my best game of netball.
It's like the equation to change is like awareness plus action equals change. And I feel like you can apply this to this conversation of, like you've been saying, if you get aware of your cycle and how that impacts you, you can then put in whatever actions are going to be helpful for you. Yeah. And again, I just like the permission slip that it doesn't have to look a certain way, or it doesn't have to, like you said, what is right for some people won't be right for others. Yeah. And I guess a part of that as well is being open to it changing over time.
Yes.
I was on the pill last year. I'm now, what do I have? A coil this year. And it's massively changed my experience of my period and what my cycle looks like and how much it affects me. So I guess that's a big part of it as well, is not feeling like the cycle has to always look the same.
No.
But staying in touch with it over time.
That's almost the inconvenience, right? Of it. Because the linear world it is the same. Yeah. I'm going to pigeonhole you, and it's going to look like this, and it's going to sound like this, and
that's my dream world.
Right?
If it was possible and if it was actually healthy. Sounds great. Very clear, very simple. But it's just not life.
I like those two caveats, though. You're just like, if it's healthy, I'm not sure. Because I also wonder, like, where's the space for creativity in that? Where's the space for innovation? Yes, sparks of joy to be able to come through where you're just like, I have no idea. If we always know, then where's the growth?
And if we're always on, I mean, it's A, not sustainable to be always on. And B, I think, at least for me, when I look at my business, I guess this is going a bit wider than just menstrual cycles here, but when I look at my business as that linear growth rather than cyclical, and I'm always expecting it to be, growth on growth every single month externally, what that stops me doing is A, like you've said, kind of getting the clarity, getting the ideas, almost steering the ship a little bit instead of just running and running. But also for me, it stops me looking at the qualitative gains. Yeah. It's a big mindset shift for me. It was about a couple of years ago when I was in this real state of growth of like, the business needs to keep making more, and I'm going to push to 7 figures and 20K launches and yada, yada, yada. And I look at where the business is now and I'm like, actually, it looks smaller and less quote unquote successful. But because I can see it in that cyclical nature, I can see all of the growth that's also happened in the dark and that you can't see. And like you said, all that stuff that's happening under the surface. Mm-hmm. And I find it such a helpful analogy whenever I'm starting something new or I'm working with a client who's doing something new, to remind them of that cyclical nature of a project, of like, don't expect it's going to be in summer from day one.
Yeah.
You know, and I look at this podcast, it was in winter for quite a while. There was a lot of sowing seeds, there was a lot of preparing the ground, there was a lot of waiting and nurturing before it actually, like you said, those buds began to show or anything actually started to bloom. And it's like, cycles are in everything that we do in business. It's just, are you going to resist them or embrace it?
And you might have a preference, right? You might have a preference that you want it to be summer right now, or you might be in summer and be completely overwhelmed and be like, can I go back to spring, to the planning phase? Like, I know, like, it's really interesting. Like, if you think about your cycle, do you have a preference of where you sit? So mine is in a spring. I love it. All the potential.
Interesting.
But none of the responsibility.
I can see myself liking spring. Yeah, I love the planning.
Yeah.
Love the ideas.
Yeah.
When it has to go onto my to-do list, I'm a bit like, right, someone else want to do this?
Yeah.
But I like the part of summer that's like shiny and big, but not the work to the shiny and big.
I'm so generous at the end of my summer phase, my end of my inner summer. I walked into the grocery store last year at Christmas. I ended up buying like a ridiculous amount of advent calendars for all my friends' kids. And I was like, why have I just done this? I got back to the car and I was like, why have I just done this? I was like, oh, I'm day 19. It's like, what am I doing? It's like, oh, I'm going to see them, so I'll buy them an advent calendar.
You just get carried away.
But then I'm just like, you know, when you catch yourself and you're like, why did I do that? What's going on there? That's not a usual thing. So it's even looking at like, when do I want to spend money? What foods do I want to eat at this time? When, like, these cravings, these natural instincts that come up that we override, or we're like, we just don't necessarily pay attention to.
Yeah.
And then you can laugh at yourself as well about it. Like, I love that about my cycle awareness. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, so I literally hide my credit card now at this time in my cycle. I'm like, no, we're not spending money because...
No spending allowed. But it's so helpful to know those things, isn't it? Because then I guess you embrace your humanness and you don't expect to be on or the same version of you all the time. Even in something I've been getting more into recently is going to the gym, and I'm working with a personal trainer, and actually they've been great at helping me to see how my performance in the gym is affected by my cycle. And it was fascinating to actually see it, because I track not just what I do but also how it felt. And I looked at these two workouts, exactly the same workout, 2 weeks apart, and 1 week it had felt like, you know, the weights were weightless and I was just like smashing it and everything felt easy and I was pumped up. And then I did the same workout yesterday and all my reports were like, never doing that again, sets were too many, weight was too high. And then I looked at I'd done it before and I was like, oh, that's what they mean, of like, it's the same me, very different experience of the same action.
Yeah. And also to that point of like, what we then, so if I was to meet you at a different point, I'm meeting a different you. So when we understand that we're cyclical, automatically we're more compassionate and more permission giving of other people, because we give ourselves that same permission. So we become a more compassionate culture. Like, it's so incredible to see the ripple effect of this stuff.
Yeah. I feel like we should put it on our Instagram bios.
100%.
Currently in this phase. So this is what you can expect of me. Thank you very much.
That's a really great idea. Like, every time, like, I'm going to shift, I'm just going to be in inner summer, inner autumn, don't come near. No. I'm actually really efficient in my inner autumn. I think a lot of people just kind of, it can obviously be a horrendous time for people. And I know things like disorders like PMDD and stuff like that, which is not obviously what we're talking about today, but your atypical premenstrual crying whilst folding the laundry because life just feels a bit too muchness.
Yeah.
And those are your signals. Like, your body is talking to you. We just think there's something, we internalize it. We go, there's something wrong with me. I need to go to the doctor.
Yes.
I need to go get some medicine. There's something going on. Like, I've had all of those thoughts. And then and there are cases where some people need that, don't get me wrong. But then it's that, as soon as you bleed and your realization of like, that's shifted, right? That's moved. That thing, that intensity, that sort of, I almost experience it as like a falling, like a free fall. And it's like, it can feel really unsteadying. It can feel really, but it's your cue to separate. It's your cue to, this is when, back in the day when they had red tents, this is when you'd remove yourself from all of your responsibilities in life and you would go and you would rest in a red tent.
I personally would quite like that to still be a thing.
It is still a thing out there. You can go and like...
Great.
Yeah.
I'm just going to be like, I'm off. See you all later.
Yeah.
Even it's made me laugh in my head as you were saying then about like noticing your behaviour in that autumn season. Last week I dropped an egg on the floor and I just burst into tears, and I'm not a crier. I was like so tired and frustrated and anxious. I've had like a rough day. And this egg just completely broke me. And I just stood there looking at it and I was just completely over the edge. And then I came on my period the next day and I was like, there we go. That's all the explanation we needed.
Yeah.
So if off the back of this episode, listeners are thinking, right, I'm ready to learn. I'm ready to sort this out. I'm ready to embrace and kind of work with my cycle. What is the best first step?
So I have a cyclical tracking toolkit.
Amazing.
Which people can hop over to my Instagram if they want to and download, which would be a great way for people to start tracking.
Fab. I'll link that in the show notes.
That's great. Thank
people can find that straight away.
Yeah. And then also it's starting to set yourself up in a way. So then once you start tracking, then being able to maybe look at your diary and go, what is it? Okay, now I've got this insight. So I've tracked for a while.
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing with this. People want quick fixes. And this thing about the cycles...
You're speaking to the lover of quick fixes over here. I'm like, right, Lou, what do we change right now? I don't want to track for 3 months. I want to change it right now.
And I can hear that. And I'm just going to say that some of this isn't a quick fix. So
I feel like that point was for me. But listeners, I hope you enjoyed that encouragement as well.
And just, setting expectations here, guys. But what you can do today is just start tuning into how you feel, right? Use pies.
Can you remind us what pies stands for?
Absolutely. Physical,
Yep.
so the body. So that might be anything and everything from like my skin's spotty or my skin's dry, or I'm noticing I'm really hungry, or I couldn't be asked about eating today, or
I have cramps.
Yeah, I have cramps, absolutely.
Yep.
The physical stuff. Cervical mucus as well, so around the time when you're ovulating, that kind of thing, you can track that. It's a really nice way to notice that physical bodily change and actually come into connection, because a lot of the time we are disconnected from our womb and our kind of yoni areas, our vulva and our vagina, and all of those physical things are also made to be something that we're supposed to feel uncomfortable about. So even just starting to track those physical changes can be really healing. Yeah, and then like workouts and things like that. So like it might be like, I'm feeling really strong today, or like I was like, I did not have it. So for me, I'm a swimmer, and my breathing really changes in my premenstrual week. So we know that the mind and the breath are interlinked, or the mind and the emotions are interlinked. So it's not surprising then that your breath gets shorter in your premenstrual week, or mine does anyway, because I'm feeling more anxious, and that's coming out in my emotional body, and then that's coming out in my physical body by a shortened breath. So that's something I've learned through menstrual cycle tracking for me personally.
So P is physical.
P is physical. I is intellectual or mental. So like if we're feeling into like, what's my mental space like today? Am I busy? Am I distracted? Am I super focused? Am I critical? Like, what's going on up there? Can I just tune it in one word? And it's instinctive, right? So this isn't like a long process where you're going to sit there and think.
Yeah.
This is about working with your intuition, and it doesn't matter, right? It's kind of this thing of like, oh, I can journal on this, or I can have 4 words. You can change it. You can work with it. It can be, whatever you might need. The emotional and then energy, right? So it's like, oh, I've got like such a zest for life. And here's my tip. Okay, here's my top tip. Tired is often one that comes up at this point. But I'm going to ask you guys to just ask yourself, what quality of tired are you? Because you can be like bone tired, you can be drained tired, you can be physically tired, but really, and it like, do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
so there's
completely.
different, like mentally tired. So I'm like to just encourage people to kind of get curious about tired, because it can be quite a sweeping statement, and it's like, and then
Certain people say, how are you? And you're like, I'm okay.
Yeah.
It's like, right, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Let's have a bit more clarity
what's
there.
okay about okay? Like,
Yes.
what's tired about tired?
Yeah.
Right?
Gotcha. Sometimes I have it, like for me, it's most often my body is full of energy and I'm like pumped on life. My brain's just not.
Yeah.
And I always talk about it of like, I'm just not in the right gear in my head right now. Like my head's just not doing its thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so you can start to see that we're made of more than just this physical thing, and we've got these different elements to ourselves. And then the last one is S, so is the spiritual side. Some people connect more with like intuition. So that's kind of coming from like a deeper space inside you of like, is there anything, how connected am I feeling? Am I feeling presence? Am I feeling wobbly? Am I feeling just like, where's my core at?
Yeah.
Right? Like that seed of center. Where's that at? Have I had any downloads today? Is my intuition's really telling me to eat chocolate? Okay, I'm going to listen to that. I'm going to have a bit of chocolate. Like whatever, I'm being silly, but you know what I mean? Like it's, my intuition is telling me that I need to rest, or I need to say no to that thing, or my intuition is telling me, my spirit, my core is telling me I've overcommitted, right? Like just starting to tune into that. And that is what you can do today.
And would there be also some awareness, perhaps, if we're thinking about the different areas that we work within in our business, you know, maybe thinking about creating content versus like big project work versus clients versus creativity, and almost noticing across our cycle, when do those things feel their best?
Yeah, absolutely.
And kind of where are the strengths?
There are cycles and cycles and cycles with this, right? And they're not necessarily the length of your menstrual cycle, but you might want to, if you want to start working with one. If you're like, meh, about the menstrual cycle, focus on your creativity cycle then. Focus on your productivity cycle. Again, with the productivity cycle, when you download the toolkit, there's a diagram there of just like, it looks like the 4 seasons, but it's the inner seasons, but it's about the productivity cycle, so people will receive that as well. And it's going through this kind of like dreaming state into like planning, initiating, and then in creating and connecting, and then back into focusing and completing, right? So it's like, that might arc over 3 months. That might arc over a year. That might arc over 5 years. But that process, like you were talking about with the podcast, is that productivity. Like, what do I need to be doing and when?
Yes.
That could be a day, right? That could be a meeting that you have. You could use it as a structure for your team meetings. But it's starting to kind of notice again, as you say, like, what do I need to do and what are my strengths in this point? Because actually, when I'm in this state, it feels really uncomfortable. Okay, well, how can I get more comfortable? What do I need? Because what Lou's talked about today might not be what I need at this point. But as you've repeated, it's the permission slip to be able to say, get curious about that then.
Yeah.
What is it that you need? And so you can do that with your creative cycle, with your productivity, parenting, with your business just in general, like business planning, right? If we talk about business planning, I know you're a big planner. I feel like we need to co-create something about this.
I'm here for it.
But, you know, being able to have like a quarterly, you know, taking that masculine structure to then be like, okay, I'm going to do my business planning for the next 3, 6, 12 months.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of splitting your year into quarters and
right.
Yeah, because there are seasons everywhere.
Yeah.
So I always find fascinating with all of the clients I work with, everyone's business has a seasonality to it.
Yeah.
It's just noticing it and working with it.
Yeah.
Is really powerful.
Yeah.
I feel like we could go on forever, but we're going to have to stop at some point. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared. I've genuinely found it really fascinating.
You're so welcome.
And I'm going to go download your tracker and I'm going to actually track before I try and make any big changes. So
yeah, and you got my number, so you can just message me and let me know the little ahas.
I'm just going to send you updates. Like, by the way, I've realised that I can't crack eggs on that day, or I will cry. Okay, yeah, that's our theme.
Yeah, I get so clumsy. It's such a, and then when you hear it, I think this is the thing, when you start talking about it more, and people are like, "Oh my God, me too," and then you're like, "I'm not alone."
Yes,
because I think we're all experiencing this stuff, internalizing it inside ourselves, and feeling like I'm the only one. And I think that's what's so powerful about coming together and talking about it, is that we realize we're not the only ones. We're not the only ones that are experiencing this, and your experience is valid.
I think that's a perfect ending point. Thank you so much. I will list all of your links and all of that resource that you mentioned in the show notes.
Thank you.
Appreciate you sharing. And yeah, I guess I've got so many, I almost feel like I'm just more tuned in now to look for the cycles and see how I can work with them. So I'm sure the listeners are feeling the same way.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Love it. Thank you.